mess up. But on behalf of the University of Maryland's graduate program in historic preservation and the entire faculty of the School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's lecture, which is it's the Fall 2015 Marvin Breckinridge Patterson Lecture, part of the school's lecture series. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening, and I want to begin by welcoming our speaker, Mr. Thomas Reinhart, to the University of Maryland, and I think we all look forward to his presentation on using BIM, Building Information Modeling, and Revit on understanding and documenting historic buildings. The Marvin Breckinridge Patterson Lecture was established through a generous gift from Mrs. Patterson in 1998 to support an annual public lecture on historic preservation. Born of privilege, Mrs. Patterson dropped her given name of Mary, and under the name of Marvin Breckinridge, she studied photography, cinematography, and journalism. Mrs. Patterson's cousin, also named Mary Breckinridge, was the founder of the Frontier Nursing Service in Kentucky, and interestingly was the subject of our Mrs. Patterson's first and acclaimed silent movie, which she did in 1930. Mrs. Patterson went on to work as a freelance photojournalist and CBS broadcaster in Europe during World War II. She was hired by Edward R. Murrow and was one of the first women correspondents to report on the war. In 1940, she married a Foreign Service officer named Jefferson Patterson and had to end her career in journalism because of the restrictions on the wives of State Department employees in the Foreign Service. In addition to endowing our lecture, Mrs. Patterson is also known for her generous gift to the state of Maryland of Jefferson Patterson Park, which if you haven't been to is an absolutely wonderful site. Before introducing our speaker, I just want to thank a couple of people. Obviously, Mrs. Patterson, the late Mrs. Patterson, for her endowment. Chris Hinojosa, who worked to coordinate all of the publication and publicity for tonight's event, and also Ruth Davis Rogers, our dynamic HISP administrative assistant, raise your hand, Ruth, who has provided all the support to make tonight happen. Tonight's speaker, Thomas Reinhart, has been Deputy Director of Architecture at George Washington's Mount Vernon since early 2013. Tom began his career in archaeology, completing his undergraduate work at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, a time at which we first met. He holds a master's degree in classical archaeology from the Florida State University, where his thesis dealt with the first uses of marble as building material in archaic Greece. He has conducted archaeological field work in the Athenian Agora, ancient Corinth, Crete, and Caesarea Maritima, thank you, in Israel. In 1997, Reinhart changed his career trajectory to focus on American architectural history, receiving a master's from the George Washington University. For 14 years, he worked for the Maryland Historical Trust, principally as the administrator of architectural research, where he oversaw the entire statewide architectural survey program. He's documented dozens of 18th and 19th century buildings and resources. He's written about the mid-19th century Blandair Farm in Howard County, the importance of architectural field work, and is currently at work on a study of the architectural expression of Catholicism in Maryland from 1634 to 1850. Since arriving at Mount Vernon, he has headed up the Historic Architecture Program in the Department of Historic Preservation and Collections, and he has overseen the restoration of the mansion's 1758 stair, the neoclassical new room, and most recently, and literally just finished, the cupola, and will begin work on a major fire suppression project for the main mansion in the next months. So, without further ado, please join me in a warm Maryland welcome for our colleague Thomas Reinhart.
Tom and I didn't just meet; he was actually my boss at my first
we don't need that.
real archaeology job. Well, thank you very much, Don, for that very kind introduction, and thanks to the staff for their help in getting everything set up for this. And thank you for the kind invitation to come and speak to you today. The management of cultural landscapes, large or small, presents unique challenges for preservationists. Our job is to preserve indefinitely and as intact as possible resources that are continually deteriorating. There are external pressures, such as the development of lands that were once part of a historic parcel, but no longer are. At Mount Vernon, this is keenly felt. At the time of George Washington's death in 1799, Mount Vernon totaled 8,000 acres. But today, only 423 of those acres are under the protection of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. The rest have been divided and subdivided into hundreds of suburban homes. Despite this reality, Mount Vernon, historians, archaeologists, architectural historians are obligated to know as much as we can about this historic acreage and to take advantage of every opportunity to extract information out of a landscape that has been irrevocably altered. We also face internal challenges. On those 423 acres are more than 50 structures, including 20 modern support buildings that help us run our day-to-day operations. The Department of Preservation is responsible for the care of the rest, which fall into three basic categories. 7 replica structures, and we define these as reproductions of Washington-era buildings that are constructed somewhere other than their original location. So that would be the Pioneer Farm down here, which was on the Dover Run Farm, several miles from where they were reconstructed in the 1990s. We also have 13 reconstructions of Washington buildings that stand on their original locations and often on their original foundations. That would be principally the distillery in Gristmill. That's the newest facility that was excavated archaeologically and then rebuilt. But we also have 16 surviving 18th century structures, the mansion and the outbuildings, in which the inhabitants of Mount Vernon, both free and enslaved, were born, worked, lived, and died. With multiple resources to steward, things can get challenging. There's always many projects going on all year long at Mount Vernon, and we are open to the public every day. So sometimes preservation work it has to be shoehorned in to some unusual periods of time. Also, blessed not only by the virtue of the fact that we steward the home of the father of our country, but because we are so close to the nation's capital, we have the largest visitation of any historic site in the United States. It is somewhat of an ironic fact that our only challenger to this title is Graceland. And after risking his life and livelihood to defeat one king, Washington is still fighting against another. So in addition to preserving the resources and serving those visitors, we have to also have a modern infrastructure which needs to be upkept as well. So the Historic Preservation Department not only encompasses archaeology to care for our underground resources, it also encompasses standing structures and GIS to help us manage our landscape. And this project, this Historic Building Information Model project, as you will see, will encompass all of those 3 programs when we are completed. In order to accomplish our work effectively and efficiently using best practices, we need to know as much as possible about the historic resources as quickly as possible. Mount Vernon has a problem many historic house museums envy. For a group of typical 18th century vernacular, unarchitected structures, we have a great deal of primary and secondary source material to study, to understand our structures. It informs us not only about design, construction, use, alteration, and in some cases the demise of these 18th century structures. That information is not particularly well centralized. There's a number of sources on the estate. And then, of course, because we rely so heavily on the Washington papers, I mean, they're spread all over the globe. So we have this great volume of primary source documentation, including Washington's letters. It is not very well known that George Washington built much of Mount Vernon while he was not on the site. And in order to oversee that construction project, he wrote weekly letters to his plantation managers, both during the Revolution and during the presidency, to get updates on what was going on his 5 farms. That 8,000 acres was broken into 5 separate farms. And he also then would write back each week, commenting on those reports and giving instructions to his plantation managers. We have those work reports as well, and then we have the very detailed financial records that Washington left behind. He was nothing if not meticulous when it came to his finances. We also have a 160-year archive of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, which, being America's first preservation organization, that encompasses a lot of material. We have the letters beginning even with just the foundation of the organization before it actually took possession of Mount Vernon. We have the minutes of all the meetings that happen annually. We have superintendent's diaries that stretch over decades. We also have decades of restoration files, architectural drawings, photographs, and we have a fairly solid historic structures report that was completed on the mansion in the 1990s. And of course, we have the physical fabric of the buildings themselves. And they inform us every project that we start, every time we do any work, we learn more about the history of those buildings than we knew before. So you folks are probably a more well-educated audience and are more familiar with the history of architectural recordation and design than most audiences I speak to. So it's no surprise to you that architectural drawings were once drawn by hand. But of course, over the last few decades, they have started to become digitized. So we draw now in CAD. And so that digital information is a lot more malleable, a lot more useful in some ways than the old school drawings were. Of course, we went from 2D CAD to 3D CAD over the course of the last few decades as well. What you see on the screen is the only photograph that survives of Washington's 16-sided barn, a structure that he himself designed and built in the early 1790s. And what you see overlaying on it is a drawing of the frame. In addition to this photograph, we had a bill of scanty, a list of the timbers that were cut to actually construct this building. And when Mount Vernon reconstructed it, architectural historians used that photograph and the description of those timbers to hypothesize about how that building would have been put together. Then the architecture firm that we worked with, Quinn Evans Architects, created this drawing to sort of test out those theories and to work out the bugs in them. So what you see up in the upper left is the completed building. It's still standing, so I think they worked it out fairly well. And then, most recently, the development of BIM, Building Information Models, using the AutoDesk program Revit. Engineers and architects can design 3D in 3D, but more than just designing in 3D, what Revit brings to a model is a data system that backs it up. So, for example, the building you see on the screen is our new Fred W. Smith library for the study of George Washington, and it was designed in Revit. So it is a BIM model. If you wanted to find out some information about the windows in that central bay, you could click on it, and the technical information about those windows, be they Anderson windows or Pella windows or whatever, would actually be held in a database that backs up that drawing. You click on it, and it would be able to provide that information to the architect, to the engineer, and then that package, of course, can be passed on to the owner and serve sort of as a facilities management, the basis of a facilities management program. So BIM has really been very exciting, and I was first exposed to it when I worked at the Maryland Historical Trust. Our office was involved on a big project in rewiring the Maryland State House, and there was a lot of space that was open, and when when this was advertised, a scanning firm, Direct Dimensions, out of Baltimore, north of Baltimore, wanted to come and scan the work that we were doing, scan and show us, advertise their product to us. So they came and scanned, and it was the first 3D scanned building that I had ever seen. And they explained to us in trying to pitch the idea of how you could use these scans, and one of the things they talked about were these BIMs, these building information models. And immediately, it seemed to be a logical fit for the management and preservation of historic structures, albeit retrofitted, but it was a good fit. So when I came to Mount Vernon, we were moving forward, the Department of Preservation was moving forward with a great emphasis on the new digital humanities. So we have a lot of digital humanities projects going on. We had a brand new GIS program, and this idea of trying to retrofit BIM to a historic structure fit right in with the program. We were able to start a pilot project. We partnered, coincidentally again, with Quinn Evans Architects to create our historic building information model. So the first phase of this really was a trial. The plan was to model the entire house, but to concentrate only on the north third. The house itself is built really in 4 stages. The lower center section was from 1735, second story was put on 1758, 1775, a south addition is added, and in 1776, what you see here, the new room addition is added. It is completed in the 1780s after George Washington returns back from the Revolution. So we focused on that because the new room was the object of our most recent restoration effort. So we had just completed all this research on it. It was all well organized. It was all fresh in our minds. So we decided that's what we would concentrate on. So we see the HBIM as really a 3D filing cabinet where all the information that we can muster about a space can be stored digitally and then can be accessed through the model. It integrates not only stewardship data, but also associated archival records. And we wanted to define the access and use of the data and the references. And we wanted to clearly indicate the level of trust that we had in the information that we were putting into the model, because we knew that if this was a successful attempt, that this would be the management tool for the future. And in generations to come, we wanted them to know what our thought processes were and how confident we were in what they were seeing and in the model that we created. And then we also wanted to increase the functionality of the model. I'm sure there are a number of people in this room who know Revit. Revit is not the most user-friendly program. I am a Revit idiot. I only know enough to show it off in dog and pony shows like this. That's why we hired the very skilled architects at Quinn Evans to build this model. But we wanted our model to be searchable, we wanted it to be able to push and pull data, and we wanted people to be able to access it more easily than they could by using Revit alone. So there was a 3-step process that we put into place. First, we collected all our data, then we created and organized the HBIM, and then we created a user interface. So step 1 was to get the mansion digitized. So we scanned the entire mansion and created a point cloud, as you see here. But as the architects found out, translating that point cloud into a model is sometimes a little bit difficult. One of the things we learned is that when there are cobwebs hanging from cellar rafters, the architects can't tell what's rafter and what's cobweb. So we worked out a system whereby we would scan a space, we'd walk a space, we'd scan a space, we from Mount Vernon would send Quinn Evans backup documentation such as photographs, we would all that of the work that we had done, so that they could clarify any inconsistencies in the scan. And as you can see, we have some black and white photographs from the 1930s on the screen. The open stair there was our Winters project, where we restored the 1758 staircase. So we had a lot of information to feed to the architects as they worked on the model. We also have a very large collection of architectural drawings. Surprising, I think, to a lot of folks, Mount Vernon has never been recorded by the Historic Building, the American Building Survey, but we do have generations of very carefully done architectural drawings starting in the late 19th century. And we not only have just those detailed sort of presentation drawings, we have what you see here, design drawings. This is a truss that was used to bolster up the framing of the new room ceiling to prevent it from collapsing. And this was designed in 1930 and was installed shortly thereafter. And we also had our historic structures report, where very knowledgeable people before us had sort of sussed out some of the major questions, but some of them were still a little bit in the dark, so we still had more work to do. But we also had a cultural landscape study, which did the same thing. It sort of broke down the entire estate and into sections and analyzed each one historically and gave us a landscape into which we could set our knowledge of the mansion itself. And then when questions arose that we could not answer through existing documentation, we got out and got into the spaces. We recorded, did our own series of CAD drawings as needed in order to answer the questions, have that digital information to be able to clarify and to make the model as accurate as possible. The second step was to organize the data in some way that made sense to us and to other people. And what you can see right there was literally that was a sort of a stream of consciousness discussion for one of our meetings about how we were going to push and pull information and how we were going to organize it. We wanted a hierarchy of information, and because we had that cultural landscape study, we had a very burgeoning GIS program as well. We knew that we wanted to do more ultimately to create a digital universe for Mount Vernon rather than just to have a 3D model of the house or just even a BIM of the house, a 3D model with the data to back it up. So what we did is we went as broadly as we could and started with the idea that GIS really maps the entire world, and that there were ways that we could extract information and express information to scholars, to our interpreters, to our visitors, using GIS. So we started really with the entire globe as at the top of our pyramid. The view shed is the area that we see from the piazza of the house across the Potomac into Maryland. The subject of a very successful view shed preservation program since the 1950s. We use GIS to manage that program, not to prevent development, but to manage development in order to preserve the view shed as close to what it looked like in the 18th century as possible. The neighborhood is what we would call that 8,000 acres that has been subdivided. There's still archaeological resources. There are still traces of field boundaries that we know about in the neighborhood despite the development. So we wanted to be able to manage all that as well. The estate compromises that 423 acres that the MVLA owns. And then using our cultural landscape study, we break down that estate into different landscape areas. And then we divide. We have our built resources that they're standing structures above ground. But we also wanted to be able to develop a system that would help us manage our horticultural and garden resources, our landscape features such as those trenches, walls, fences, things like that, but then also our archaeological resources. So we can divide on the left there, we can divide our landscape resources into levels above and below ground as well. And then they all come back down and can be broken down into elements and parts. And then the last, parameters. Parameters are sort of we've adapted Revit to give us certain bits of information at the touch of a button about the parts of a building, or the parts of an archaeological site, or the parts of a garden. The HBIM, which is the focus of what I'm going to show you for the rest of the night, is in this box. So the mansion is divided between interior and exterior. It is divided on the interior into levels, the basement and 3 stories above that, which is subdivided into rooms. Each room has its own identifying number. That was actually already in existence from the study that was done in the 1990s. And the exterior is broken down into the 4 cardinal faces, the 4 elevations. They come back together, and each of those then can be each space or each face of the building can be subdivided into its constituent elements, such as a door, which then can be divided into parts such as panels, rails, stiles, hardware. And then each of those parts can have information attached to it. So this is our schema of how it works. So the resource is the mansion. Each one of our 18th century resources has a 3-letter code that identifies it in our structural hierarchy. Then we break each building down into levels. So the mansion, we're going to look at the first floor, so that would be mansion 1. Each of the first 4 rooms then has a number of its own. So the new room, which is the focus of our principal phase 1, is mansion 104. Then it's divided, the new room is divided into assemblies such as floor, ceiling, walls, cornice, windows, doors, all the parts that make up the room. And then they can be subdivided, in the example here, like a wall can be divided into its plaster and its lath. And then information can be attached to that, such as the year that the plaster was installed, the year that if it had been replaced, the year that the original was installed, who did the work, who did the most recent work on it, what is the surface material of it, is it paint, is it wallpaper, and we can do that, we can capture that information for all of the parts of the building. But also note down at the bottom that there is documentation 1, 2, and 3. So for this pilot project, we attached, using Revit, we attached 3 documents to each of the parts of the building. Now these documents, these pieces of documentation, can be anything that's digitized. So it can be full paint reports, it can be the chapter in the HSR about that particular section of the building, it can be photographs, it can be those architectural drawings, it can be CAD drawings, it can be whatever we have on hand or whatever we think is the most important information that we want the user of the model to know about that space. So the parameters themselves that we talked about display in Revit in a menu that will pop up on the side. And when we open up Revit, you'll see that. And we had to custom create all these. Revit comes pre-stocked with these parameters that are for modern construction. So through retrofitting it to a historic structure, we created our own set of fields, so to speak, for the data structure. Now, as I mentioned, we wanted people to know what we thought about what we represented and the information that we used to create that representation. So each element, each part in the model gets what we call a level of development rate, LOD. It is a 3-digit number that assigns a confidence level to us based on location, shape, and material. So, for example, if we scanned a room and we were able, and there had been a hole in the wall and we could see a stud through that plaster wall, the location of that stud is going to be very high because it was captured in the scan and we know it's exactly there. But we can only see, say, maybe that much, a foot of the stud. We can get its shape, and that because we can measure it, and we've captured it also with the scan, but we can field check it. But we're not maybe sure whether it's all 18th century or it only maybe goes down another foot and then got cut off because we can't see behind that plaster. So if we haven't been able to lay eyes on and field check every aspect of it, we will give it a lower level of confidence. And likewise, material. If we identify the species of wood, if we know that for a fact, if we know that only from documentation, perhaps Washington said, I would like the frame of my wash house to be made out of white oak. Well, we have that. That might get a 4 or maybe a 3, but if we went out and actually looked at the framing and confirmed that all the framing is white oak, well, then it would get a higher level of confidence. We also wanted to assess the sources of basically our documentary sources that were informing us of what we're basing our decisions on in making the model. So that is degree of reliability, DOR. And that is a 1-digit metric that assigns basically a confidence level in that particular source. So it's either 5 is very reliable, if we know that if we've checked other things, if we field checked it, we know it's great, and that it is, we have like a 90% confidence level in this particular document, we will give it a high confidence rating if we haven't field checked something. But if we know it's a source that, like the source that told us that the wallpaper in the new room was hung by the crown princes of France on a visit, we don't have a high degree of confidence in that. So that piece of the puzzle would be given a very unreliable, because we know the name of the people who hung the wallpaper. Okay, so our user interface, as I mentioned, Revit is not, and you will see me all thumbs working through Revit in a few moments. It's not widely available to the general populace. And we want this model to be widely available to the general populace. We have various target groups, not only preservation staff, not only scholars who have an interest in Mount Vernon, who don't work for Mount Vernon, not only our interpreters who have to present information to the public, but also we hope to make this available online so that folks can get certain information, the historic information that is held in Revit, maybe not where our HVAC runs or what the settings of our HVAC is in the mansion, but the information that we want to make available widely. But in order to do this, in order to make Revit itself not the principal program through which you extract that information, we needed to create a user interface. So we had some requirements. First, we wanted it to be off the shelf. We wanted no special skills needed to use it. We wanted it to have, needed to have 3D visualization. And it needed to be interoperable with AutoDesk Revit. Right? If it can't communicate, it cannot do it. So we worked, we also wanted it to be able to pull data and to push data. So those were our requirements. So we looked at various programs and various approaches. First, Revit, too complex, special skills needed, we didn't use that. We looked at facilities management software. It was very expensive and it didn't have a very good 3D visualization, so we didn't go with that. We looked at cloud-based construction management software. Those are based on construction projects, which they're a portion or a percentage of the fee or the construction schedule, and they just didn't work very well with what we wanted. And we tried 3D PDF as well, but it doesn't push data, and it really is limited to a single building. And as I said, we had this vision that we're going to be able to spread this out over the entire estate and integrate it with GIS. So we looked at a web scene using ArcGIS. And we contacted Esri, who is one of the major players in GIS. And at the time, they were very interested in getting to develop 3D GIS. They wanted to get into buildings. We had a building with a 3D model. It was a match made in heaven. And Esri really pulled out all the stops and helped us create a really great user interface. We did a proof of concept with them, and I'll demonstrate that to you as well. So we were very happy with that outcome. So the web scene using ArcGIS has lots of advantages from our perspective. It manages lots of data, interacts with Revit very well, and the web scene can be accessed online and it doesn't require any special skill whatsoever. And I will operate it, and you will understand that that's true. So the first thing I want to do, however, is to show you. Let's see if I can get this to work. I think I might have to kill my PowerPoint. Have I got it over here? Kill my PowerPoint. Restart it in a little bit, because I want to show you the Revit model first. And we might have to push it one way or the other. There it is. There we go. All right, that's the PowerPoint. We're getting rid of that. Now we're going to move our. Don't worry, folks. This happens every time we try and show this. There it is. Okay, so let's make it big. And there is Mount Vernon in Revit. Of course, I can't see it on my screen. It's always a fun time. So here's our model. And it is, you got to move a little slowly because it's really pretty large. But as you can see, we have the entire exterior of the house modeled. We also have the entire basement. Our 22-foot dry well for housing ice goes all the way down, but I'm not showing the entire thing. And you can see it has everything that the mansion has. It has the rusticated siding, has the cupola. But what Revit allows you to do then is to, of course, take a look down into the building. And you can see that we have been finishing out, since our pilot project was successful, we've been finishing out the mansion. So we have our new room here. This I think one of the real tour de forces in this model was the staircase, which I'm going to show you again. Cut the model the other direction so we can see the staircase. Here, I think. There it is. Zoom in. And we expected and demanded a very high level of detail. So the moldings that you see reflect the actual moldings in the house. The staircase is exact. The model is so big that we actually have broken it down into separate models. Exterior, we've broken it down into a staircase model, a framing model, and then one model for each of the 3 floors. This model you're seeing is all of those put together. So Revit can draw from all of those models at one time. But the staircase was really, every piece of that staircase has been hand modeled to match the original. It really was an impressive feat. Quinn Evans did a fabulous job. But as I said, it's not just a pretty face, right? Lots of historic sites are scanning and modeling at this particular juncture. So we get this thing to work for you. Go straight on. But let's just take a quick look at the new room. So here is the new room, finished in 1787 and restored in 2014. So here we are. If I hover over the plaster once the computer's done thinking, now I don't know why I'm not seeing where our, maybe you can go over a little bit more. I don't know why the menu isn't showing up. We're going to need to find out where I am. There I am. Let's see if I right click. Probably should be fine. All right, well, I'm not going to be able to show you the menu because it's beyond my capability. Anyway, so I highlight this. And if the menu opened up, if you could see it, it would tell you that this wall was plastered in 1787 by Richard Tharp, and that it is still 1787 plaster on that wall, that it has a green Vertiter wallpaper installed in 2014. It was hung by Derek Tickle. All that information is in there. You see these patches on it that are not highlighted. If you click on one of those patches, get one of those patches to light up. that patch would light up and tell you that that was a plaster repair done in 1950. So that would be the key element. Now, that seems like maybe sort of like a hinky little architectural history point, but since we are, as Don mentioned, about to put fire suppression into the mansion, if I have to put a sprinkler head in that wall, I would much rather put it through 1950 plaster than 1787 plaster. So it is really very helpful. It's going to allow us to protect, down to inches, preserving inches of the mansion, square centimeters, that will keep it that much more Washington than we might otherwise be able to do so. Okay, so now, the other thing I would like to show you, if I can, where I am. I think if I bring this over here, here's my menu that was missing. It didn't come over. So here's our information about that plaster. But if I go to this wall and light it up again, what I want to show you is that down here, if I can get it to stay, you can see why we need a user interface, because I'm the weak link in this. I click. I have to send you back over here. I click on it. What it opened up on my screen is a photograph showing where those plaster patches are. And that's our documentation to show why we know that they're there. So it allows us to sort of, the model allows us to sort of access it, like X-ray right through the wallpaper, so that we know where that stuff is. And then if we need more information, if we want to check what the documentation is, we can open up that information right there. So move you over a little bit. And then one last thing I want to show you, because I think it's pretty exciting when we get to see it. Turn you around. Is if I tilt up and grab one of these guys, and I isolate a piece of framing, you can see that we have every stick of the mansion. It's not complete right now. The cupola is actually, Quinn Evans was working on it this week because we just completed our restoration of the cupola and gave them all the framing information. But you can see that we have the entire frame modeled. We can look at the mansion in a way that we cannot in real life, right? We're never going to strip off both all the interior and exterior siding or the plasterwork on the interior. So this allows us to see things that we would not be able to see holistically, all in one view in reality. All right, so I want to take down our Revit model, and then I would like to show you the user interface. Because one of the things you might have noticed when we looked at the model is that it just kind of floats out there in space. And that is really not what we're aiming at. We're aiming at integrating this model into a real digital landscape that is an exact duplicate of the actual landscape. So we had LiDAR flown earlier this spring, so at a very high level of detail. So now we have a perfect digital map of the landscape. So this is the proof of concept that this web scene that Esri developed for us would be able to interact with Revit. So I'm just going to fly you around a little bit by pressing some buttons. And what you can see is that we have landscape. We have landscape here. So we can do things like cut away the wall, enter the new room, turn our walls back on. And this proof of concept was done early and does not reflect the model that you saw. It reflects the earliest stages of the model. So here we are again. I can click on the wall, and it's going to display all that same information that the Revit model showed us. There's our patches. They'll highlight as well in the same exact way. But it has some other really great features. So if we go back out here, and going the wrong way, back away, It has a search feature, so I can just type in here, door, and every door in the building will highlight. Then you can click on that door and get that information. You can search specific doors. If you click on the door in the model, it'll give you the same information as well. But, as I said, we're not just looking at this as a way to manage the buildings. We want to manage the entire landscape and hopefully be able to push this out as well to our modern infrastructure as well. So, but looking at the landscape, if I put locust, and then I zoom out, every locust tree on the estate will highlight. So we can track, our horticulturalists can track all of their work as well using this interface because it is GIS based and all of our horticultural plans are managed through GIS as well. So that's the interface. Let me see if I can get this last.
If you click on a tree, does it actually give you the information on the tree?
If I put it to the right spot, I click on that tree. It does. There it is. It will give you that information on the tree. And we have a huge tree survey that was done. All of our trees have been scanned. We know their heights. We know their diameters. You know, and what you're seeing in there in this model, these are the actual trees that are on the estate. And again, this was just a proof of concept. So when this gets applied more broadly, it's really going to be a very, very useful tool. One other thing that I'll show you is this, as we go zooming in, smashing through the wall, is that it's not just useful for architectural historians. If I back out just a little bit here, this sun allows you to track, based on the time of year, how the sun is going to fall through the windows. That, when our curators and our collections folks saw that, they went crazy, because that helps them predict where the sun, know where the sun's going to be, so that they can place their objects, original objects, in places where they're going to be the least impacted by environmental conditions like that. So that's pretty exciting as well. So let me see if I can get this to close. Now let's get back to our PowerPoint. If that will work. Slide it over. All right, now, I can't see it on my screen. Oh, I know what I did. If I hit this, it should go on this screen, right? Yes, okay. So, let's just go down a little bit, because we just have a few closing slides, and then we'll be done. All right, so you've seen the model. You've seen the proposed interface, which we're very excited about. I'm sorry about this part. So there's the interface. And now, next steps. First, because you saw that the interface looks a little video gamey, which we always joke that, you know, we're going to get some zombies in there and we're going to have, it's going to be really fun. But it does not have the same quality of textures that Revit has. So we have been working now with Esri to try to work out a system, and this is well beyond my ability to conceive. Our GIS guy and Quinn Evans have been working with Esri to extract the textures out of Revit. So they have their plan now about how that's going to happen. And so that when we get that interface up and running online, it will be the same textures, be the exact same model that we see in Revit. We're finding that Revit's data capacity is far short of what we need. So we're in the works of getting a content management system, which will manage all of our massive holdings, our archival holdings, and Revit will be able to pull that information out of the content management system. So that's a step beginning. And then finally, we are going to have HBIMs for all of our structures. And that is in process. And I point to your own Kara Johnston, who modeled this summer, single-handedly, I believe with one hand tied behind her back, she modeled our salt house. So we now have 2 functioning HBIMs at Mount Vernon, and we're very proud. And Kara, I'm happy to tell you, well, not happy to tell you, that we had to take siding off the salt house this week because the sill is rotten, and now we have all sorts of detail that you didn't get. So
great.
We'll have you over at Christmas, at the winter break. We'll have you out, and you can update the model for us, right? So that's where we're going with this. We're really excited. I think, actually I do have a closing paragraph which I will read to you and not just ramble. In closing, I think that the use of the BIM to manage historic resources, both the documentation related to them and the fabric and any modern infrastructure, is an exciting and attainable goal for any historic site. You do not need to have, using Revit, you do not need to create the level of detail that we did. Revit has lots of tools that allow you to sort of make generic staircases and things like that, and for a smaller house museum that doesn't have the resources to hire someone to model so specifically, I think it's still a great system to use, even if it's not down to the detail, which we're using in ours. And additionally, the integration of BIM with GIS is attainable and allows for a seamless digital system that facilitates the preservation of our past for our future. Thank you.